Hey there. Thanks for tuning in. You ready for another episode of my Bigfoot sighting? Alright then, let's do this.
Seen a bunch of rundown no-horse towns where the church is the backbone, love's in the plow, and the five-string melodies grooving, with the farmland rows where the roots run deep, beyond the noise of the busy streets, where the songs of the South are soothing. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah.
My Bigfoot sightings began on the Mogollon Rim in Arizona, which is one of the largest pole pine forests in all of North America. That happens to be a big area for just casual campers on the weekends, also for hunters during hunting season. But this particular area, some research that I did with friends, basically, we kind of narrowed down where some of these sightings were, and we would get our camping towards those areas, mostly using topo maps and also experiences that people had within this group. There's about 10 to 15 of us at any one time. We go camping, and it's called the Mogollon Rim. And like I said, that's in central Arizona. It's about 8,000 feet, or it can be up to 8,000 feet. And we usually stay around the 7,000, 6,500 foot level. And we use very old logging roads that aren't primarily used by weekend campers. There's many lakes up in that area where people go camping, and most of the people camp off the roads, and they usually don't go on these old logging roads. We do hike into these areas. We camp into these areas. And so we have many wildlife sightings, lots of elk herds, lots of deer. There's all kinds of turkey and all kinds of pine areas where you can have lots of camping areas where it's nice and soft ground. The primary reason why we did that is my interest is in Bigfoot is because I had an experience as a kid. But my sighting was back after I retired in 2012, went into the woods with about 9 of us to an area on the Mogollon Rim where I had the sighting. Basically, the logistics are pine in an open area like a cul-de-sac at the end of an old logging road that's not used too much. And we set up camp as if you were in a wagon train. We circled the wagons, so to speak. My particular camping setup is half hard side, half canvas, where the canvas folds out into a king-size bed, and then they have the rest of the facilities in the other hard side portion of it. That RV was on the outskirts of the cul-de-sac, which was wide open with a fire pit in the middle that we had put in. And so all the vehicles and tents and everything were on the outskirts of the wooded area. That really led to being close to everything in vicinity to, if there are any animals coming in, we would be right at the edge of the woods. Now, this particular area is on a ridge line that has a choke point with 2 other ridges on each side. So there's lots of wildlife in this area. It also has water, which is one of the things you primarily need if you want to have an interaction with these creatures or Sasquatch. One particular evening we went out, and the other thing is that there's another topographical thing that really helps you out there. There's a large area where power comes through the Mogollon Rim, and it's really large. There's a big electrical grid going right through there. And I'm told, and I wasn't sure because at the time it was only the second time I was out there or researching, and I'm not really sure it's that. I was just really interested in the topic of Bigfoot or Sasquatch. Power lines were going through that area as well, not far off from this particular camping area. So we went out to those power lines one evening. It was about 10 o'clock at night. This is in June of 2013. It's June or July. I just put 2013, but I know it was the summer months. And we were out there for at least a week. And we finally were going to an area at the power lines. We were sitting there, it was 4 of us, and we were watching the power lines with a thermal. And I had a Gen 3 night vision, and the moon was a half moon. So we could see really well with the thermal and also with the black and white Gen 3 night vision. With that in mind, we're sitting on the power line, and above the tree line at the power line, I know that I have an open mind to everything, that this orb was about 1,000 feet away from us to the south. We were on the north side of the power lines. And there's an orb that's just bouncing on the tree line. It lasted for about 6 seconds, and then it just disappeared. And we were just like all looking at one another going, what the heck was that? And we all just kind of like, that was the weirdest thing. And it was large. It was not a small orb. It was big enough for it we could see it 1,000 feet away. So it really sparked our interest, and we kind of got a little spooked about that. And then we observed some wildlife, basically coyotes. We saw some deer come through and some elk come through. And later on, we saw a bear come through. So we were out there for like 4 or 5 hours, and it got really cold. It was about 1 o'clock in the morning. So we started heading back to camp. Once we hit camp, everybody was so exhausted because other groups had been out too. And so there was about 9 of us or 10 of us that particular camping trip. So if that orb wasn't enough, we kind of talked about that a little bit. But everybody was so tired. It was getting to be 1 o'clock, 1:15 in the morning. Everybody went to bed. I went into my camper, and before I could even close my door, I could hear people snoring. So I knew everybody was exhausted, and it was basically, if anything was out there listening to us, they knew right away we were all going to sleep. So I stayed up for a little bit because I was cold, and I turned my heater on in my camper, and it makes a loud noise. And so I heated my camper up, and the minute I shut the heating element off in the camper, I heard a wood knock, and it sounded as if it was right next to my camper. And it was so loud. And I thought, man, everybody had to hear that, but nobody got on the radios to talk or anything. I heard nothing but snoring. So I went, I'm going to stay up a little bit. So I stayed up for about another half hour. Didn't really hear anything. And then the minute I went to just go get some rest, I heard another wood knock, and it was right behind me. So I went, wow, they're here. So I got my night vision out again, and I very, very slowly, I didn't want to make any noise, started to open the zipper to one of the windows so that I could see out into the camping area. Once I started looking around with my night vision, I heard another knock, and it was a softer knock, and it was right across where the rest of the campers had made the circle around the campfire type thing, circling the wagon thing, as I explained. So there was one across from me, a wood knock, and one behind me, a wood knock. And then I heard a third one, and it was to the west. So in my opinion, I had 3 observers or 3 sentinels or 3 of these beings or creatures or Sasquatch, Bigfoot, whatever you want to call them. I knew there were 3 of them. I couldn't get anybody to wake up to talk to me. So I was the only one that was hearing all of these wood knocks. I was looking around the camp to the north, the west, and the east, and I was not looking to the south of me because I didn't want to move around too much in the camper and alert them that I was awake. I heard a crow, which crows aren't out in the forest at night. They don't make noises at night. And then I heard another wood knock, and that was to the west. So I was looking to the west when I heard across the way, one of the campers had a easy up that was attached to the back of his pickup truck with 3 panels closing in his easy up as if it were another room for him. And he had like his table in there and his coolers, and he had some electronic equipment that he had put out, to try and record anything that was going on. And then there's other campers on each side. So like I said, there's 9 of us and we were in this big circle. So I heard a cooler slide from this guy, this male camper that had the easy up with the panels all the way around it. So he had this room and this easy up is all white and his panels are all white. And I heard a cooler slide. So I immediately I try not to glass so that there's any reflection from the moon light we had about a half moon. You got to go slow with the night vision so that you don't glass it and cause a reflection that, anybody could see it that's out in the forest. So I went really, really slow with the night vision and I see this cooler had been slid out from underneath the camper across the way from me. It was about 100 feet away. And I see the cooler had been slid out from underneath one of the panels. And again, it's all white. And I see this figure and it's squatting down in this really weird position, not like a human would squat where your butt kind of like squats down to the ground. This squat was like a complete dog leg, like an L. And I went, man, that guy's got some good muscles to be able to, do that. I don't squat that way. And it was squatting right next to the cooler it had drug out from underneath the tarp. And then I started getting a little like, what the heck's he doing? He woke up and got outside. And what is he doing? He's making all this noise. And I'm getting all of this, wood knocking and vocals and things of that nature. And I'm thinking, he's going to ruin this for me. I was starting to get a little mad at him, but then I started dawned on me, nobody answered the radios. And so I thought maybe it was, exactly what I was going there to find, but then it looked so human to me. It was not overly large. It was, in my opinion, skinny, dark figured, could see it completely with my night vision because the tarp or the panel was completely white. It silhouetted on that panel perfectly and it looked human to me. It was completely black. There was no deviation in clothing, nothing like that. But for whatever reason, my brain told me that's a human. That's somebody messing around in the camp, stealing somebody's beer or something out of the cooler, or trying to find something to eat because they were hungry. And they knew that this particular camper always brought tons of stuff to eat. So I watched it and just kept watching it. And it lifted the top that was bungee cord to the landing for the easy up, just pulled it up with its left arm. And when it pulled it up with its left arm, he just stuck his arm up underneath the tarp. And on top of the cooler, unbeknownst to me, I didn't find this out until the next morning when we went to investigate. On top of that cooler, he had another orange cooler that has, water in it, like construction workers use those coolers. And so on top of that, unbeknownst to me, he had put a recorder. And this thing reached up underneath that tarp, pulled down the recorder through the panel, let go of the panel, and had the recorder in its hand. And I could see the hand clearly, and it was a human hand. It grabbed it fully with all the fingers around it to include the thumb. So I found that really weird. And again, I'm 100 feet away, and I've got a really good night vision equipment. I just saw it clearly. So with the recorder in his hand, there's a little LED light on the top of it showing that it's recording. And so it started playing with the light on the recorder on the white panel of the Easy Up. And as it's playing, it's lifting its arm way up, and I can see hair draping off the arm. And I went, oh my God, it's not the camper. This is a Sasquatch. This has got to be either that or somebody's wearing a leather jacket with tassels hanging off of it, because you could see the hair clearly. And this little tiny LED light put off a lot of light, and it reflected back on this being. And he just was playing with the light. I watched him for a good, at least minute. And then there was a wood knock and a whoop. And I knew what a whoop is from educating myself with mostly YouTube stuff and BFRO, people that I had met that were very nice. I had done an expedition prior to this, and these campers were all very knowledgeable that I was going with because we had going there to seek this creature out. So it stopped immediately. This is how I believe, anyway, that the whoop is some type of warning for these creatures, because it stopped in its tracks and just held that position and very methodically and slowly came back down with his arm. And it was a male. I'm almost positive it because the silhouette was a total skinny guy, and didn't know how tall it was yet because it was squatting the whole time. And I didn't see any breasts silhouetted on the tarp or on the panel. And he just went ahead and he picked up the panel again, stuck his arm underneath the panel, put the recorder back where he found it, and then took the tarp and tried to stuff the top into the handle of the cooler. And this cooler is one of those big Costco white coolers. They're humongous. You need 5 people to carry it. One of those big guys. And he tried to tuck the panel into the handle of the cooler. And he just spent too much time doing that. And then you could see there was a little frustration, and it stood up so dramatically, like it was frustrated, stood up. And I didn't realize how tall he was at the time, but his head went above the railing of the Easy Up. So it didn't peak the Easy Up, but he had to be a good 6 foot tall, because I think those are like 10 by 10s, at least 6 feet type of Easy Up. So it did like a military, like turned around in a military, like, I guess, maneuver, and just took 2 steps and he was gone. He went right back into the forest. At this time, I was thinking maybe it was the camper again. My brain went back to that. And I don't know why, because then everything went just completely silent. There was nothing happening after that. And I was up for about another hour before I involuntarily fell asleep, because it was a long day. So that was my experience with watching that particular being. And I still was 50-50. I didn't know what the heck it was. And daylight came the next morning. I was up early still. I'd only slept about 4 hours. And there were some campers out, and I came out to the fire pit and I started asking, hey, did you guys hear anything last night? I heard this and, a couple other things that were related to Sasquatch noises and wood knocks. And there was some vocals and weird bird sounds. And, they said, no, I fell right to sleep. I was so tired. I said, yeah, I could hear all you. We were just kind of joking around. So I could hear all of you snoring because I was up. And then finally, the camper that was where the cooler is at, he got up. And then as he got up, he opened up his rear tailgate to his truck. And when he did, it just flopped down and made this huge noise. And then that's what really got me into knowing that, holy cow, that wasn't the camper, because I would have heard that fall, if he got out of his camper to do that. And I just waited for him to come out to the fire pit. And I said, do you sleepwalk? Did you get up last night? Did you do anything at all last night? And he goes, no, I fell asleep. I was out of it. And I said, well, then you had a Sasquatch about 3 feet from where your head was sleeping, because this is what I saw last night. And everybody was just like, what? And so we went over to his campsite, and he goes, wow, my cooler's moved. Who moved my cooler? And I said, after telling him the story, I said, this is who moved your cooler. I believe now it was this creature, this being. And at that point, I was a little catatonic, because I was watching and observing this thing, believing halfway it was a human and halfway, what the heck is this in the forest or over here bothering all of his stuff? So we all got together. We talked about it. We took pictures. We did all of that good stuff you're supposed to do and document it well. And we went out that day hiking. We're all big avid hikers. We like to go out and ATV and hike. So we were doing that all day. And then we decided that evening that we were going to recreate it the same time, the same everything. So it just meant another very long night. But at least it was in camp and it wasn't out in the cold, somewhere on a forest road looking around. So that particular night to do the recreation, we wanted to make sure we got it right. So everything was the same time of night, the same everything. But we're all sitting around in the middle of the cul-de-sac, just waiting for the night to go by. We're all just kind of jib-jabbering. We're not overly loud. The normal things campers do, and that's what we try to do, is just stay normal. We did not have a fire, however. We went ahead and just acted like normal. So about 12:30 a.m. on the night of the recreation, we're talking about the events that had occurred the night before and what we were going to do and how we were going to recreate it. And the camper of interest where the cooler was pulled and the easy up was at, he dressed the same so that we could recreate it and see if that was the guy and things of that nature. And we had one guy, he's like 6'6", and he's skinny. And so basically we had the perfect Sasquatch to use as a model, but first we wanted to do the camper so that I knew it wouldn't have been him out that time of night. So about 12:30 rolls around, and I'm an observer. I am a trained observer. I've been trained my entire life to observe things and witness things and produce evidence because of these things. So I'm always looking at everything. I never really look anybody in the eyes when I'm talking. I was looking into the forest, and in the end of the cul-de-sac, where we would have to the round portion of the cul-de-sac to the west, where I heard the wood knocks the night before. I also heard them to the south and to the north. But to the west, I saw maybe 75 yards, feet away. How do I describe this? The moon was still around half moon. There's like grass that's about in the forest floor. It's like yellow during the day, but at night it kind of lights up like white with the moon shining on it. And that is actually the choke point at the end of the ridge. So nothing could be going through there for campers because we're not on that choke point or that portion of the ridge. So from one ridge to the other at that choke point, a creature was running right through, like at Olympic pace. And I'm looking at it, and the only thing I can see is from the waist down, and it running because the forest was completely black beyond that. So the only thing that was lighting up from the moon was that grass. I don't know what they call that grass, but it was only maybe a foot high, and it was running right through it. So maybe a little taller than that. But because it went beyond to the end of the ridge, there was really not too many trees. Although there are trees, there weren't that many. So it was all lit up except for the blackness above where you could see the grass being lit up by the moon. And so I could see it running. And as I'm watching it, there's a couple of people saying, "What are you looking at?" Because my head is like following it from left to right or from south to north. And I'm saying, I can't believe my eyes. This thing's running through camp. And immediately when I said that, they started looking. Two other individuals kind of saw the tail end of it. But this thing ran so fast on 2 feet. It was not a bear. One of the people said I was probably a bear. I said a bear doesn't run that fast on 2 feet. They kind of wobble. I've seen bears on 2 feet. We saw one that night that was first we were out. The bears are totally different. It had long legs, but they were like stovepipes. It didn't remind me like it was the one from the night before. I think it was a different one, but it really had big stovepipe legs, and they just pound. The weirdest thing about it is that it ran exactly like everybody says it runs. It doesn't run like a human. It runs with the knee coming way up and the leg coming square down. The weirdest thing about it is that even though it was that close to camp, you could not hear it running. No one could hear it running. And that's what really kind of freaked me out. It's like, we should have heard that running. We're right here. So I followed it out of sight off to the North Ridge, and everyone were running over there with their night vision and stuff like that. But it ran so fast, and I looked at it for too long. If I would have said when it first came up off the ridge, the south-facing ridge, across the choke point in front of us. It was like midway by the time I had words come out. And so these things happened so fast, and I got it. And then, I kind of like, holy cow. I seen a Sasquatch twice within 24 hours. And I was with people who have been doing it for 20 years there, and they had never seen one at all. And it kind of freaked me out that then I was really kind of a little freaked out, because I absolutely had no clue that this would happen so frequent to only the second time in the woods actually going with people to experience these creatures. So I think I'm lucky in that aspect to it. I think really just my training and experience is what got me to see it the second time. Otherwise, it would have ran through and no one would have ever heard it. I saw it. It just went so fast, and it made no noise. That's what was so kind of creepy about it. And so that for sure, what I saw was from the waist down. I did not see any genitalia. I don't know if it was a male or female. I just saw the legs running like it didn't have an upper body, because the forest was so black. It was pitch black where the trees would be in the background, but the grass lit it up from the waist down. So that was the second time. And we believe that was, a lot of people said that's probably the same one, but I don't think it was, because that first one, the night before, was tall and skinny, and it reminded me of a human. It didn't remind me of a creature, but it was solid black. So this happens. It runs through camp. Everyone's trying to get their night vision going, and no one saw anything definitive for it. Just a couple more seeing the tail end of it run like past the tent. So that was at least somebody saw a little something. So it kind of made me feel better that I wasn't imagining things. So after this whole thing and this hoopla, and everybody's like all stoked, we're all awake now. We decide that we're not going to wait till 2:30 in the morning. We're going to do it right then and there. The recreation over at the camper, where the tent tarp truck area where the cooler was pulled. So we get the camper that was in this campsite, and we pull the cooler out like it was after the creature had pulled it out. And we took it back out the same way it was, because he had moved it back into his tent area. So we pulled it back out from the tarp and had him squat next to it. And he was in a pair of jeans and a white t-shirt. And it just stood out like a sore thumb, that t-shirt, on my night vision. I said, no, it wasn't you. It was not you. First of all, you're too small. And the white t-shirt stood out. So I knew that the figure was all black at that point, where it just gave me a confirmation that what I was looking at was all black against the silhouette of that white panel. The 6'6" guy, he's a cool guy. He's an avid hiker. He's a conservationist too. So he knows the woods. He loves the plants, the trees. He can tell you everything about the birds. And so it's really kind of cool having him along on these camping expeditions. So he gets next to the cooler, and I went, wow, he's got the height. But when he squatted to try and reach under the tarp to get the recorder, it was really tough for him. He has long arms because he's a big guy, tall guy, and he could barely reach it to grab the recorder out from on top of the cooler. And he pulled it out and he started playing with it. And I said, yep, that's what he was doing. That's what this guy was doing. And one of the people that was recreating it with me with the night vision, they said, wow, that's pretty cool. I mean, who would want to just go touch a guy's recorder and play with the little light on the tarp? I mean, that doesn't make any sense for any of campers to do that, but it would make sense for something that's curious, that is curious about what we have in our camp. The other thing is how I feel about the recorders, that this is not the first experience with recorders I've had with them, that they're not too afraid of recorders at all. They don't mind touching the recorders or picking them up or sniffing them or any of that, or eating an apple in front of them. You can hear them eat an apple. We've had that recording. But I don't think that they're afraid of the recordings. I don't think that bothers them at all. I don't know what it is with trail cameras, or it might be because of the way we point them. They might possibly think they're dangerous to them, and so they hide from them. But it just played with the recorder, which I found to be pretty cool. But I also noticed that they're not afraid of making noise in camp, because when that cooler was pulled, it made a loud noise. It was like, I mean, it really was. It's on dirt and it pulled it and it made a lot of noise. And so I thought that's what really attracted my attention to it in the first place. So I don't know if they're so stealth or if they get caught doing dumb things or they don't care, because the snoring I could hear. So they probably thought everybody was asleep and they came in to fool around in camp or what have you. But I know there was at least 3 because of the wood knocks and because of the action on the part of the creature that came into camp. So when we did the recreation, we ruled out that it was any of the campers. And although the girth did change a little bit, the tallness was there on the part of the other researcher. And so we got the height pretty good. It was probably over 6 feet, but the girth was not there because we recreated it. I mean, that cooler's about 2 feet wide, and that creature filled up that cooler area. So it had to be wide, even though it looked to me as though it was thin. It really was a large creature, or I'm just going to call it Sasquatch because I believe that's what it was. So once the recreation was done, we pretty much all went to bed, and we didn't have anything happen after that. We were there for several more days, and we went on hikes and saw structures, and there's a water source right where that camp is at, like not more than maybe 1,000 yards away. And there's a beautiful little stream that goes through there, and it's actually has a spring. And so it's good water. It's fresh water. So that is my Sasquatch sighting for that particular event in the forests up on the Mogollon Rim in central Arizona. This one was just ridden with sightings, and it was freaky. I only saw the one, but there was like several other people in this whole group that saw him too. So this one's a really good one too. It has a lot of other stuff in it, like eye shine and road crossings. There was road crossings on a couple of people I'd seen in our group. And we put out shells on the edge of my trailer, and we could hear them playing with the shells, and they took some shells with them and left rows of 3. They did some really cool stuff during that one. But there was a lot of people. We went up. This was an actual expedition in Colorado. We kind of left the group because they were just too immature. They weren't people who were been there for real kind of like research. They were just there to smoke cigars and drink beer, I think. And some of them learned and some of them didn't. It was one of those things. So we kind of went off into the forest by ourselves, and we had a lot of experiences. This expedition was in 2015. We went to Colorado, east of the Rocky Mountains, in a very rural area, which was an old forest road. The forest road was so bad you couldn't drive on it fast at all. We were there for quite a bit of time. We started, I think it was a total of 4 nights and 5 days. And everything started there the first day. We didn't want to stay with the group, so we found our own camping area. There was 4 of us. And I was in the same little tent set up, a hard side, soft side kind of trailer, which I bring my ATV with me. And there was a van, a sleeper van, and the same camper that was sleeping during the Sasquatch encounter, my first Sasquatch encounter. And he's dying to see one of these things, but he sleeps through it. He's a good sleeper. And he had a tent towards the end of this gated, locked forest road. So we pull in this driveway where the gate is at, and we set up camp. As soon as we set up camp, we get a vocal. The vocal is like a wahoo. And we all look at one another and go, oh, this is going to be a good expedition. And so once we finish getting camp set up, we go on a hike and we see some signs. We see some structures and we see broken trees. You kind of like have to take that with a grain of salt. If they're not twisted, in my opinion, like a lot of researchers say, I kind of negate the whole fact that it's not a leaner, it's not a directional sign, it's not any of that. I really look for the nitty gritty ones where it was impossible for this to happen to this tree. But we saw some of that stuff. So we were pretty satisfied. The first day was pretty much on our own. And so we just went back to camp and acted like regular campers. And we started towards the evening playing Cards for Humanity. I think that's what it's called. I don't know. I haven't played it since, but it was funny. It was really, really funny. We're laughing and joking, and we have a fire going, and we're sitting at a table adjacent to the fire, and we're playing this card game, and we're just having fun, and we weren't expecting anything. And the next thing we know is there's eye shine, huge, huge eyes. Like everyone describes in any of the sightings that people have about eye shine, this really truly was a yellow, green eye shine, and the eyes were probably anywhere from 9 to 12 inches apart from one another in the tree line, in the dark tree line. And you could not see around our camp at all. It was just pitch black. And there was no moon, just a sliver moon, like a fingernail. So it was really, really dark. And so I see the eye shine, and I just completely stop laughing, and everybody's laughing. And then they look at me and go, "What's wrong?" And I went, "I got eye shine." So everyone just freezes because you don't want to spook the creature. You know, everybody wants to see the eye shine, I suppose. And like the senses on all of us at that period of time, the hair stood up on the back. I've never had that happen until like later on, a couple of years later. The actual hair on the back of my neck, it was so stiff. I was, oh my God, this has never happened to me before. And just watching this creature, it never blinked. It was not blinking. I'm looking at it for a good solid 30 seconds now. And finally, one of the campers sitting next to me, she looks and she doesn't express whether she sees it or not. But the camper in front of me, she gets up, she turns around, and she goes to the fire. I'm going to go stoke the fire and see if it'll move or do something. And she goes to stoke the fire. It's gone. No eye shine. And so that kind of creeped us out a little bit. And we weren't as happy playing cards as we were before. So we kind of like, it was getting late anyway. And so we stayed up a little bit more and watched the fire, and just, it was still creepy. It was that close. It couldn't have been more than 30 feet from camp, and just in the tree line. It was not an owl. Nothing flew away. You know, we went through all of that process like we always do. We always try and make sure it's real before we say it is real, what we saw type thing. So that was the very first night. So we knew we were kind of in for something, because if they're interacting that early with you, they're going to be with you for a while. And the next day comes around, we go hiking. We found some tree structures. We found a beautiful arch right across the trail. It wasn't there when we went, but it was there when we came back on this trail. And so we knew that there was at least sentries, or people call them sentinels or sentries. They're watching you. I didn't get any feeling of being watched, but a lot of other people do. So we had all of that kind of little activity, some tree knocks. But the interesting thing is we go back to our camp, and we're pretty remote from the other campers that are in this group of people who went on this expedition. There was quite a few people. So we're sitting in camp, we're having lunch or late lunch, early dinners, something to that effect in the late afternoon. And we hear a vocal, and it's loud. It feels as if it's in the distance, but not in the distance. It's almost like it was made not to be in the distance. I don't know how to explain that any better than it was close, but far. I guess that's how it. Anyway, it's a vocal, and it's just a wahoo. And next thing we know, about 30, 45 seconds goes by, and it's a motorcyclist coming up on a dirt bike on the road. And it comes up on the road, and it passes by us and keeps going. And I thought, oh my God, that's strange. It just made a vocal for this motorcycle coming up the road. So we paid attention from there on out. Like every time a car came up or a motorcycle came up that logging road, there would be a vocal in the same manner. Like it was warning whoever else was around that there's a vehicle coming. We kind of got used to it. Every time we heard a yahoo, we knew a car was coming, and it was every single time there was something coming up that road. So that was a cool experience. The next night we went out. I don't advocate going out at night. I don't do it anymore, but I was new in the game back then. And I've learned from experience that don't go out at night. You'll get enough if you just sit there and camp and wait for them to come to you. That's best anyway. They don't really bother you when you're out there. But we did on this particular night. We went out, and this is close to a beaver pond. And there was a beaver pond with, it wasn't an unabandoned beaver pond. It was actually a dam a beaver had built, and the beavers were active. And it had cattails and all the water and all the things you need for a creature to live in that location. It had food sources. It had elk and deer and porcupines and all kinds of food sources in this area. And of course, the water, which is definitely the number one thing you should look for first, is to make sure there's water where you're researching. In this case, basically what we were doing is just walking the trail. And we decided to stop, and we kind of just stopped and congregated and started talking. We're just trying to be as normal, as you can be at midnight, 1 a.m. in the morning. And I was looking down the trail, and another gentleman, he was a new guy we had just met. It was a really cool dude. And he and I were talking to one another, and I was facing him and he was facing me, and I could see his eyes just kind of like glassed over. And so I turned around and I saw an image going from left to right across the trail we had just come down. And he goes, "Did you see that?" And I go, "Did it go from left to right?" And he said, "Yeah, it did." I said, "Well, did it run? Did it jump? What did it do?" Because I saw the motion mostly. And we started talking about that. As soon as we started talking about that, we got bluff charged. As soon as that figure crossed, like not more than 10 seconds later, it crossed about at least 150 feet away from us. And seconds after that, we got bluff charged right behind us, cracking trees, breaking branches, the whole works, stomping. And so we backed off from the tree line at that point because we were right at the tree line. And I said that had to be one watching us, because that guy didn't have that much time to get over to us. We would have heard it. But so there was one standing right there where we were standing. And that got to me. And we said, "Okay, we're out of here." We started walking, had to walk the same trail out of there. So we explained to people what had happened there. And so a couple of guys went over there with some night vision and thermal, and they caught a figure over near they actually have it on tape. And I do have that tape. And basically, they just see it standing up and then squat down right away. And they said, "We're out of here." And you could see them running off on the thermal, on the images and stuff. So there was a lot of activity in this area. It's east of the Rocky Mountains, like Pikes Peak that way, over towards, there's no civilization. It might be a little town, and that's about it. There's really, with a little grocery store. And we went beyond that about 20, 30 miles. We were really in the national forest there, and there's nothing around. So that would be my other Sasquatch experience, along with other things that they did around camp. We put some lights out that were in balloons. You can get them for like birthdays and stuff like that. But we put a balloon on my ATV, and we came back. This was during the day this happened, so it wasn't at night. So they must have seen it when it was lit up at night. They came over during the day or the morning where we had taken a morning hike. And when we came back, the balloon was completely taken apart, and the little light was taken out of the balloon source and put on the ground. So I don't know who would do that. No one was there to see, had anyone done anything that came to the camp or anything like that. But I thought that was rather strange. And we had some marbles and seashells out on the back of my trailer portion where I put my ATV, and they played around with that. But what was interesting is that they took them and put them in rows of 3. And we didn't leave them like that. They were all just discombobulated and stuff, but they organized them. And I thought, who would come over here and do that? And then drop some on the ground and left them on the ground, because they would have made like even numbers, I think. I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there. I don't know why they would put them in rows of just 3 shells or 3 marbles or 3 anything. So that was kind of cool. And then that same night, the trailer was shaking. And so it woke us up and it shook the trailer pretty hard. And then after that, once they woke us up, they probably knew we were awake, and then they shook it really gently. It was really weird knowing that they were just about maybe 5 feet from you. It was intense, to say the least. So that was my experience in Colorado, and it started from day one, and it didn't stop until the end of time that we were there. We were there 4 nights, 5 days. And so it was really a cool experience in Colorado as well. And I go up in the Mogollon Rim for a couple of weeks every year since, even just the last time I was there. I've had pine cones thrown at the trailer where I park the trailer in the same place every single time. We go up to the rim. Now you have another place that we go to. And again, another forest road that's way, way back there. I mean, that's really the way to interact and just act normal. As much as you can, just act normal. Try not to get frightened, because you can be frightened by these things. And they usually don't show themselves, but they do all kinds of other stuff. We've had tents pushed in. We've had rocks thrown at us, pine cones, always a cooler is messed with. They seem to like white coolers. That's all. The other ones with different colors, they don't really mess with. But that would be so many other experiences up on the Mogollon Rim in central Arizona. And they're well documented up there, but some are not, obviously. They also have a fun run that takes about 38 hours. It's 100 miles. And even runners have experienced weird things on the trail as they're trying to do this trek. It's called the Mogollon Monster. And they have stories to tell too, because it goes through all the wooded areas. And I think they climb an elevation of just about 8,000 or 18,000 feet, and different, goes up and down, up and down. So that's a tough run. It takes about 40 hours, 38 to 40 hours to finish that. So it's really a great popular place to go camping. If you really delve and get really in the backwoods on some of these old logging roads, you can really interact with them. I did have one more experience with just one other person. Went up to Kennewick, Washington, and went east from there into the Blue Mountains, and literally had contact with them within like 10 minutes of just parking the truck. We just walked the trail. We were just out hiking, and we got more wood knocks than we could count. We started to get a little worried because we went beyond a locked gate, which you could hike behind it. You just couldn't travel with any vehicles behind it. So we started walking, probably got a mile in there or so, and the wood knock started, and it just kept going all the way until we said, it's getting to be the witching hour. And almost always something happens during the witching hours. It's either late evening or early morning hours before the sunrise or the sunset. And we decided, let's turn around. We didn't have any equipment on us. We just went for, a little inquisition, so to speak, and to see if we could roust anything in the woods. And we sure did. I mean, we ended up being surrounded by these things. And at one point we got a howl. They barked at us. They whistled. They stomped. I think what they call, like chest hits. You could hear like the slapping of the chest. All of that stuff happened within like 2 hours of just doing a small hike. And we were like, wow, they're everywhere. These things are just about everywhere. We've been just looking at a topo in that instance and getting some information from researchers saying, hey, the Blue Mountains are pretty good. Go out there. And it doesn't hurt that the person I usually go with has long blonde flowing hair. So we always make a joke about it, because they say if you bring females with you, you'll almost always have an interaction. And so far, every time we've gone, I've only been skunked about 1 or 2 times. And I've always had interaction every time I go to these certain areas where I've had interactions before. Some of the campers I've gone with, though, have been really spooked to the point where they won't go back anymore. One of them was when their tent got pushed in. They're not going back ever. I don't blame them. I think that would kind of freak me out. Actually, some of the same time, they got up underneath my camper and they actually either fist punched or tapped or did something underneath my canopy to my RV. And they knew exactly where I was sleeping in this thing. I don't know. They had to know because they punched exactly right into my back, like where I was laying. They punched right there, and it woke. I was awake anyway. For some reason, I wake up before I get like a feeling, I suppose, that there's something going on, and it wakes me up. And like as soon as I woke up, I got the fist punch into the back. Just about 6 inches of foam where the fold out canopy comes down from the canvas part of the camper. It folds down into a bed, and they hit me in the middle of the back on that fold out portion. Now, I don't know who could do that. You'd have to actually crawl up underneath the camper, and I don't think an elk could get their antlers underneath there or any of that stuff. And so we kind of went and tried to find any footprints. There's never, the substrate there is so hard. Although I do have one print from the Mogollon in it. It's the only one I've ever found. It's really hard, that substrate there. And they pretty much have free will. They can roam thousands upon millions of acres of lodgepole, pine, and this goes on for miles. It's stunningly beautiful up there. Even if you're not looking for this creature, the camping up there is absolutely fabulous.
Well, that's it for tonight's show. If you've had a Bigfoot sighting and would like to be a guest, please go to mybigfootsighting.com and let us know. Thanks for listening. Have a great night.
Seen a bunch of rundown, no-horse towns where the church is the backbone, loves in the plow, and the 5-string melodies grooving, with the farmland rows where the roots run deep, beyond the noise of the busy streets, where the songs of the South are soothing. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah.